You wouldn't survive the witch trials. Part 1. The arrival. The first thing she noticed was the cold. Not the kind of cold you brace for before stepping outside in winter, but the deep, marrow-sinking chill that comes from stone, silence, and air that has never known electricity or mercy. She opened her eyes to grey. A grey sky, a grey field, and far off, rising smoke. Not city smoke, wood smoke, animal smoke. The kind that clings to wool and skin. Her name was Ellie. At least it had been. But here, she wasn't sure who she was or how she had arrived. The last thing she remembered was falling asleep with a podcast playing. Something about 17th century Europe. Witch hunts, fear, silence, power twisted into something sharp. She had closed her eyes to that voice in her earbuds. Now the voice was gone, and the silence was real. She stood slowly, her jeans stiff with frost, her hoodie out of place. The trees nearby were tall, skeletal. The air smelled of damp leaves and fire. Her breath fogged in front of her face. A crow passed overhead, silent. There was no road, no fence, just uneven land and, in the distance, a cluster of buildings. Stone walls, thatched roofs, and a church bell that had stopped tolling. She started walking, because what else could she do? As she approached the village, everything slowed. A woman in a cloak passed her on the narrow path. No eye contact, no greeting, a basket in her arms. Her pace quickened when she looked up and saw Ellie's clothes. Another man stood chopping wood by a cart. He stopped when he saw her. They all did, because nothing about her belonged here. Her shoes, her voice, her bare head, her presence. It was like she'd stepped out of a dream, or into a nightmare. She reached the edge of the village. Stone walls, narrow doors, faces at windows, and then a voice behind her. "Where did you come from?" She turned. A girl, maybe 12, pale, watching her with cautious eyes, holding a small cloth bundle, hands trembling. I'm lost, Ellie said. The girl frowned, then ran. Within minutes, the silence changed, became thicker, measured, watching. A man approached next, older, fur around his collar, a walking stick carved with marks. "You wear no covering," he said, not a question. Ellie touched her hoodie. "I'm not from here," she said. "Number you are not." He turned to the others who had begun to gather. "She speaks with foreign words," he said, "and foreign things." He pointed to her shoes. "To the chapel," he said. "Now." And just like that, her fate turned. The chapel was dark, not like the churches she knew. This one was closer to a cave than a sanctuary, smelled of smoke, mildew, and something older. They made her kneel. Questions came like knives. "Who are you? What spirit brought you? Do you know the signs of the devil? Where is your husband? Your father? Who gave you leave to walk alone?" She couldn't answer. Every word made it worse. One woman crossed herself and backed away. Another wept. A man muttered prayers in Latin. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. They heard it. The priest stepped forward, eyes wide with something close to fear. "Search her." They found the phone. Cold, dead, like her last connection to her own time. They held it as if it might burn them. "She is marked," someone whispered. "The devil brings light from her coat." Ellie tried to explain. "It's not magic, it's just..." They didn't let her finish. By nightfall, she was alone, in a stone room. No bed, no window, just the cold and the crackle of fire outside. They would return in the morning. She knew it. And she knew what would happen. Because she'd listened to the stories. She had studied the past, but she had never understood it. Not until she was part of it. And now, with no one to save her, she wouldn't survive the day. Part 2. The trial candle. They came for her before the sun had risen. 2 men, cloaked in wool and silence, opened the door and motioned for her to follow. Neither spoke. One held a rope. He did not tie it around her wrists, but she knew it could be used at any moment. The sky outside was colourless. The village still slept, but someone had lit torches near the chapel. The trial was not a courtroom. It was a ritual, and she was not a defendant. She was an answer to a fear they couldn't name. Inside the chapel, a circle had formed. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of villagers wrapped in coats and judgment. At the centre stood a table. On it, a bowl of water, a feather, a small blade, and a tall beeswax candle, unlit. She was placed in the centre. A woman stepped forward, dressed in grey, her eyes sunken and sharp. "This one speaks strange," she said, "carries fire in her pocket, has no head covering, no family. She wandered in as if from fog." Ellie tried to speak, but her voice didn't sound right. It trembled, it cracked. I'm not a witch," she said. That word, it hung in the air like smoke. Someone gasped, another murmured a prayer. "I'm from..." She stopped. What was the point? They wouldn't believe her, even the truth would be her undoing. The priest entered last, robes dragging across the stone floor. His eyes were calm, cold, like river ice. He approached her, looked at her clothes, her hands, her face. "Do you know the test of the trial candle?" he asked. She shook her head. "If you speak falsehood while its flame burns, the candle will flicker. If you lie, it will die." He lit it. The flame danced once, then steadied. "Speak your name." "Ellie." The candle stayed lit. "Are you a servant of Satan?" "No." The flame dimmed, gasps. She opened her mouth to protest, to explain, but the priest raised a hand. "Do not answer in haste. Lies do not need thought. Truth does." They moved the bowl of water closer. "Next comes the feather." A girl stepped forward. Her eyes were hollow. She held a feather in her trembling hands. She looked no older than 10. "If the accused breathes with evil intent, the feather will move." The child held it in front of Ellie's face. She tried not to breathe, but fear does not obey. The feather moved. By the end, her fate was sealed, not with fire, not with stone, but with eyes, with silence. The villagers did not shout. They did not cry out. They simply looked away, which was worse. It meant they had already let her go in their minds, already chosen her ending. Back in the stone cell, she sat in the corner, her hoodie torn, her shoes muddy, her heart too loud in her ears. She remembered things from home. Her bedroom, her mother's voice, her friend's laugh over coffee, the warmth of sunlight on her neck. Now there was only stone, and damp, and quiet. She whispered to herself, "I don't belong here. I don't belong here. I don't belong." But the walls didn't care. The world outside had already named her, and tomorrow they would begin the real test. Part 3. The water weighs. The truth dawn did not come with colour. Only a pale smear across the sky, like breath on glass. Ellie had not slept. The stone floor beneath her was uneven, the walls damp with breathless cold. She no longer cried. Even fear had begun to dull, replaced by something slower, heavier. She was numb. The door creaked open. 2 women stood outside, not guards, but elders. One held a folded cloth. The other carried a basin of water. Their faces were calm in that practiced, tragic way that suggested they had done this before. "You must come," one said. No shouting, no chains, just duty. They stripped her hoodie, her shirt, her jeans, all foreign fabrics and odd seams, left her in underclothes that didn't belong to this century. They tied her hair back. covered her shoulders in rough linen. Then they led her barefoot through the village, not to the chapel, to the stream. Villagers gathered along the banks, silent, bundled in cloaks, children clinging to parents. No one smiled, no one turned away. The priest stood on the far side, holding a book. Not open, just present, like a weapon no longer needed. The water moved slowly, black with silt, cold as metal. She was brought to the edge. "If you are false," said the priest, "you will float. If you are true, you will sink." It made no sense, but logic had no place here. She tried to speak. "I can't swim," she whispered. Someone tightened the rope around her waist. "You do not need to swim. You only need to be judged." They lowered her into the water. The cold hit her like stone. It stole her breath. Her hands reached for anything. Air, shore, rope. She sank. For a moment. Then rose. The linen floated. Her body, too light, too unfamiliar, drifted back toward the surface. Gasps. "She floats. She is false. Witch." The rope pulled her back. She coughed, gasped, fell to her knees on the bank, trembling. No one moved to help her. The priest turned to the crowd. "She has deceived us. The water weighs the truth, and the truth has turned from her." A woman sobbed softly. A child hid their face. Ellie said nothing. She no longer had words. Back in the cell, they gave her dry clothes, bread, water. No one said how much longer she would have, but she could see it in their eyes. Soon. It would be soon. And whatever happened next, she would not be believed. She would not be saved. She would not survive. To be continued in Part 4, The Ash Beneath the Pyre. Part 2. The trial candle has been added, sad, quiet, and deeply unsettling. It moves the story forward with that dreadful weight of injustice closing in. Part 4. The Ash Beneath the Pyre. The cell smelled like smoke, not firewood or cooking, but scorched earth, burned cloth, the kind of smoke that doesn't rise in spirals, but hangs heavy in your hair, your teeth, your breath. They were building something outside. Ellie could hear it, wood being moved, nails hammered, voices, not angry but quiet, practical, as if constructing death was just another chore to finish before sunset. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest. The linen shift scratched her skin. Her bones ached from cold. But she wasn't shaking anymore. There was no strength left for fear. A voice came at mid-morning, the same girl from the feather test. She stood outside the bars holding a small bundle. "I brought food," she said. Ellie looked at the girl's face, pale, smudged with ash. She didn't respond. The girl didn't come closer. "They say you won't scream, that witches don't feel the pain." Ellie's voice cracked. "They're wrong." The girl stared a moment longer, then placed the bundle on the stone floor and ran. Inside it was a crust of bread and something wrapped in cloth. A ribbon. It looked like something a child would tie in her hair. Blue, frayed at the ends. Ellie held it for a long time. By late afternoon, the sun slipped behind thick clouds. The smoke outside grew heavier. Footsteps came. This time, 4 men. One carried a length of rope. Another held a wooden cross. Not for comfort, for ceremony. The priest arrived last. Part 5. A voice in the walls. There are places where time folds, where memory presses itself into stone, and sorrow echoes long after the flame has died. Places that do not forget. That cannot. The stone cell stood empty. No footsteps echoed down the narrow corridor. No meals were passed through the small wooden door. No prayers were whispered through the slits in the wall. But something remained. A weight, a whisper, a memory that would not sleep. The ribbon lay half buried in ash. The little girl had come back for it days later, quietly without telling anyone. She found it near the charred roots of the pyre. She didn't touch it, just stared. She heard nothing, but she felt something. She took the ribbon and hid it beneath her mattress. And every night afterward, she began to hear the voice. It didn't come with sound at first, only the sense of being watched kindly, like someone standing just out of sight, not waiting to hurt her, just there, present, lingering. On the third night, the voice came. It wasn't supposed to happen. The girl sat up. No one was there. I was only walking. I didn't belong, but I wasn't evil. She turned to the wall beside her bed, ran her hand across the stone. Cold, but pulsing, alive in a way it shouldn't be. My name was Ellie, the girl whispered. I remember you. The voice returned each night, telling her things she didn't understand, about lights in the sky, music without strings, boxes that glowed. The voice was sad, gentle, always fading before morning. She told no one, but she began to ask questions. Why did they hurt you? What's it like where you came from? Are you still here? The voice would answer slowly, broken by silence. They were afraid. Where I'm from, they'd be afraid of this place. I think I am here, but only because you remember me. The girl began to write things down, on scraps of cloth, bits of parchment. She drew shapes Ellie described, letters she didn't know. She hid them beneath her bed, behind stones, inside the walls. One day, the priest found one. He called her to the chapel. Where did you learn this? She said nothing. This writing does not belong to us. These marks, they are of the strange. She lowered her eyes. Did the girl speak to you? He asked, her lips trembled. There was never a girl, he said, only a demon that took her shape. The girl looked up then, eyes fierce. She was real. She was kind. She burned, and you let her. That night, the voice didn't come, but the warmth did. The walls no longer felt like stone. They felt like memory, and in the dark, the girl whispered the name, Ellie. And somewhere, not in the world of the living, not fully in the dead, a soul lit its lantern and waited. Part 6. The Ribbons in the Wind. They found the first ribbon tied to the branch of the old ash tree. Blue, frayed at the end, fluttering gently in the breeze. No one admitted to placing it there. No child claimed it. No woman recalled seeing it the day before. Yet it hung there, silent, delicate, and impossible to ignore. The priest was the first to see it. He said nothing, just stood beneath the tree, staring, watching it move as if stirred by more than wind. That night, the bell at the chapel tolled once. No one had touched the rope. By week's end, there were 3 ribbons. One on the ash tree, one near the chapel well, one tied to the gate that led to the woods. All the same, blue, frayed, familiar, and none had been placed by hand, or so they claimed. The girl, her name was Clara, knew better. She no longer heard Ellie's voice in her room, but she felt her in the fields, in the wind, in the stillness of the church when no one else was inside. She began to walk the village at dawn, not to place ribbons, to listen. And every morning she found a new one. Hung from some forgotten beam, a cracked window, a rotted fence. She collected them all, and kept them in a box beneath her bed. Others began to notice. The midwife said she dreamed of the girl again, standing at the edge of the firelight, eyes calm, holding a ribbon. The blacksmith found one hanging from the handle of his hammer, though he swore the forge had been locked. A mother swore her baby cooed at the empty space near the hearth for nearly 10 minutes, eyes locked on something unseen. She's watching, Clara whispered. "Not to hurt us, to remind us." One afternoon, Clara stood in the chapel alone. She tied the first ribbon she'd ever found to the corner of the altar. "You should be remembered here too," she said. The air shifted, and for the first time in many nights, she felt Ellie's voice return, not as sound, but warmth. "You remembered me, and I remember you." The flame on the candle beside her flickered, then steadied. The priest grew quiet in the days that followed. He no longer mentioned the fire. He stopped speaking of demons and trials. He asked once about the ribbons. Clara said nothing, but she looked him in the eyes, and he turned away. By the time the first snow came, the village had changed. No more trials, no more accusations, only silence and ribbons. More than a dozen, tied in places where sorrow had once lived, left to flutter until they were nothing but thread. But even then, the wind remembered, and the girl who burned too soon had not been lost. She had been seen. Part 7. When the snow falls backward. It began on the last day of December. The sky was dark before noon, thick with the threat of snow. But instead of falling fast, the flakes hung in the air, slowly, delicately, as if time had forgotten which way it moved. Children held out their hands to catch them, but the snow didn't land. It hovered, danced, swirled back toward the sky, and in the silence that followed, someone whispered, "She's still here." Clara watched from the chapel steps. The wind didn't bite that day. It hummed, low and strange, like a song remembered from a dream. Ribbons moved without wind, and in the snow, footprints appeared, just one pair, walking slowly, as if from the pyre toward the centre of town. But no one walked them. The villagers gathered in the square. No one spoke, not the priest, not the elders, not the ones who still feared what they couldn't name. They all watched the footprints form, one by one, until they reached the steps of the chapel. Then they stopped. That night, Clara lit a candle. She placed it beside the box of ribbons beneath her bed. She didn't pray. She didn't whisper. She just sat. And after some time, she heard the voice again. "You're not like them. You listened. You didn't look away." Clara closed her eyes. "Why are you still here?" The silence that followed felt thoughtful. Because sometimes sorrow holds tighter than fire, because the memory doesn't burn. The next morning, the snow was gone. Not melted. Gone. And in the places where it had touched the ground, tiny blue flowers had bloomed. Flowers that no one had planted, that no one had seen before. The villagers didn't speak of them, but they didn't touch them either. They let them grow. The priest retired in spring. He said nothing of why, just left his robe folded on the altar and walked away. The chapel door remained open from that day on, and every week Clara tied a new ribbon to the beam above the entrance. Some frayed, some clean, all blue, all remembered. Part 8. The Candle That Wouldn't Die. Clara found it in the chapel, tucked behind the altar, half melted, its base warped and crusted with ash. It hadn't been there before. She was sure of it. She had cleaned that space every week since the winter ended. But now, there it was, the candle, and beside it, a match. She didn't think. She lit it. The flame flickered once, then rose, steady, warm. She watched it for hours. It didn't burn down. By morning, the candle was still lit. She returned the next night, still burning. A week passed, then 2. The flame never wavered, never shortened, never dimmed. Word spread quietly. The villagers began to visit one by one. No announcements, no gatherings, just presence. People sat in the chapel, silent, watching the candle. Some prayed, some wept, some said nothing at all. But all of them came, because something had changed, something was holding on. Clara spoke to it every night. I don't know what you are anymore. A memory, a ghost, a voice that refuses to vanish. But you're here, and I'm still listening. Sometimes the candle flickered, sometimes it didn't, but the warmth remained, and so did she. One night, she brought the box of ribbons into the chapel. She laid them out one by one around the base of the candle. These are yours, she said, and they always will be. The flame flared, soft and blue, then returned to its steady glow. Years passed. The village changed. No more trials, no more fear. The chapel remained now a place of quiet instead of judgment. Clara grew, became the keeper of stories, the collector of forgotten names, the one children turned to when the wind moved strangely, or the past whispered from the walls. And always, always, the candle burned. When Clara grew old, she passed the story on, not as a warning, as a gift. She gave the box of ribbons to a girl with kind eyes and quiet steps, and she whispered a name. Ellie. The candle flickered, then flared, then glowed on. Because memory doesn't die, not when it's held, not when it's whispered, not when it's tied to the wind. Part 9. The Lantern in the Fog. Long after Clara was gone and the village no longer whispered of witches, the fog returned. It came one evening with the wind, low, rolling, thick, the kind of fog that swallows sound and distorts shape. It filled the fields, crept into the chapel, pressed against windows, and in the heart of it, a light appeared. A lantern. It moved slowly through the mist, never flickering, never stopping. Those who saw it from a distance said it glowed pale blue, like a ribbon. A young boy named Elias followed it. He didn't know why, only that he had dreamed of it the night before. A flame moving through silence, a voice saying, "Come, see." He wrapped himself in his father's coat and stepped into the fog. The lantern moved just far enough ahead that he could never catch it, but it never disappeared. It led him past the stream, past the chapel, to the place where long ago a fire had burned. There was nothing left now, just earth, grass, the faint outline of something once scorched. The lantern stopped. Elias reached it. There was no handle, no heat, but inside the glass the flame burned steady, and etched into the side were 3 letters, E-L-I. He touched the glass. The flame flared, and he heard the voice. You remembered. So I remained. The fog lifted by morning. The lantern was gone. But Elias spoke of it to anyone who would listen, and when he was older, he returned to that spot. He placed a new lantern in the grass. Inside, he lit a candle and tied a blue ribbon around its handle. That night, a traveller on the road saw a soft blue glow through the trees. He paused. He said later he wasn't sure why, only that it felt like someone had once waited a long time for someone to see them. He didn't take the lantern, but he whispered, "Thank you," into the dark, and kept walking. Some memories are loud, others burn quietly, but the ones made of sorrow, kindness, and names spoken softly at night, those never truly fade. They just wait for the right voice and the right silence to return. Part 10. The Last Ribbon. They burned another woman that winter, not a stranger this time, not someone who wandered in from elsewhere. This one had lived there all her life. Her name was Agnes. She baked bread for the chapel, sewed shawls for widows, sat in silence when others gossiped. But silence, like knowledge, was dangerous. The accusation came after a child grew sick. Then 2. No cause, no cure, just fever and breath that turned shallow. No herbs worked, no prayer helped, no priest intervened. So they turned on Agnes. Because someone had to be blamed. Because grief demanded a sacrifice. Because the fire was still hungry. Clara stood in the crowd. Older now, but still small. Still listening. She remembered Ellie, the candle, the ribbons, the long night when snow rose instead of fell. She thought they had learned. She was wrong. Agnes was bound in cloth and shame, hands trembling but her eyes dry. She did not speak as they tied her to the stake. She did not scream when they laid the kindling. She watched the sky. There is no God here, she said. Only watchers, only echoes. Clara stepped forward. She's not a witch, she said. A hand grabbed her arm, pulled her back. Do not speak for the dead, someone hissed. You'll join them. The torch touched wood, and the sky wept smoke. That night, Clara did not sleep. She returned to the chapel. The candle still burned, but it felt dimmer, not because the flame was smaller, but because the world had grown darker. She lit 5 more candles, then 6, then 10, 1 for each name they had buried in flame. She whispered, each aloud. Ellie, Marta, Judith, Lisbeth, Annalise, Agnes, and then she tied the last ribbon. She had saved it, blue, untouched. She didn't tie it to the chapel. She tied it to her own wrist. If you take another, she said to the walls, to the sky, to the smoke that still clung to her clothes, you'll take me too. The wind rose that night, not wild, just steady, and in the wind came voices, not words but tones, sounds like tears held too long. The candles flickered, one by one they flared, then steadied, except the last. That one turned blue, software cold, bright, and Clara, for the first time in years, felt the voice return. It's not over, but you're not alone. Outside the chapel, the air smelled of ash, and fear, and resistance, because now someone had dared to tie the ribbon not in secret, but in public, and others would see, and others would remember. Part 11. The fire remembers names. The fire took its time, not in the burning. That came fast, fierce, final, but in the remembering. Each time it claimed someone, something lingered, in the smell of scorched wool, in the way the villagers averted their eyes, in the soot that never quite left the stone. Agnes was gone, but the shape of her body still hovered in the air, a shadow not seen, only felt, and Clara could feel it everywhere she walked. The air no longer whispered, it stared. In the weeks that followed, 3 more women were accused, not burned, not yet, but marked. A whisper here, a sideways glance, a silence that tightened around the well, the bakery, the steps of the chapel. It had begun again, and this time Clara was not quiet. She tied ribbons on their doors. She lit candles before sunrise. She wrote names in chalk on the stones behind the church. Names they tried to forget. Names they had thrown to fire. Someone scrubbed them off, so she wrote them again. One morning, she awoke to find her own name scrawled across her door. Not in chalk, in ash. The meaning was clear. She defends them. She remembers what should be forgotten. She didn't erase it. She traced her fingers through the ash and whispered, "Good." The candle in the chapel burned blue now. Always. People began to come in secret, not to pray, to confess. They spoke to Clara in hushed voices. I saw what happened to Agnes. I was afraid. I did nothing. Some cried. Some asked if the fire forgives. Clara said only, the fire doesn't forget, but it listens. And sometimes it waits. On the eve of the spring's solstice, The bell rang. No hand touched the rope. The village gathered, not called, drawn, to the chapel, to the light that spilled from the door like a wound. Inside, the flame on the altar had grown, not wild, but taller, steady, blue, cold, and at its base a new ribbon, unmarked, fresh, waiting. Clara stepped forward. She tied it to the post beside the altar, then turned to the crowd. If you remember their names, the fire won't burn you. If you forget, it already has. No one moved, but no one left. And outside, the wind carried the scent of ash. Not new, old, remembered. Part 12. The smoke. Beneath the skin. The candle went out on a Thursday. No wind, no breath, no storm. It simply ceased. One moment it burned. The next, the wick curled black and the wax cooled. The blue glow faded like memory slipping from a dream. Clara felt it before she saw it. Something inside her recoiled, a deep ache, a hollow collapse in her ribs. Like a goodbye whispered too late. She ran to the chapel. The door was open. The flame was gone. Only the smoke remained, and it smelled like skin. The next morning, the priest returned. Not the old one. A younger man, clean-faced, with hands that hadn't buried fire. He walked the streets with eyes sharp and voice soft. He asked questions. About Clara, about the chapel, about the names people no longer said aloud. Witchcraft does not always wear fangs, he told them. Sometimes it wears sorrow. Sometimes it pretends to be memory. But we were taught to forget for a reason. Clara knew what that meant. They had come for her now. She didn't run. She went to the pyre, the old one, overgrown now, but still there beneath the grass. She sat at its edge and closed her eyes. You've already taken too many, she whispered, but if you want more, you'll have to hear their names again. And she began to speak, one by one. Every name burned, every name erased, every name that rose in smoke. The wind picked up, it carried the words, through the village, into the chapel, past the priest's quiet prayers, and into the homes of those who had forgotten what they once believed. The air grew thick, not with fire, with memory. Clara did not return that night. They searched the woods, the fields, the chapel, the river, no sign, only a single ribbon tied to the post outside her door, blue, untouched. A girl found it. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She tied the ribbon around her wrist and walked into the chapel. There on the altar, a candle waited, unlit but not empty. She struck the match. The flame rose, blue and steady, and somewhere deep beneath the stone, the smoke stirred. Because some stories don't die. They just sink beneath the skin, waiting, burning, remembering. Part 13. The wind that carries her name. It began again with whispers, not in the chapel, not from the priest, but from the wind. The children were the first to hear it. Soft sounds carried across the rooftops, between the fields, through the cracks in the old stone walls. They said it was a woman's voice, low and slow, not angry, sad, and always saying the same name. Clara. The village changed after her disappearance. The priest took the altar candle and melted it down, replaced it with a plain white taper. He forbade ribbons. He called the old names poison. But no one listened the way they used to, because the wind remembered, because the chapel still flickered blue when no one was inside, and because they all saw the girl, the one who wore the ribbon on her wrist. She didn't speak much, but she walked with the same quiet steps Clara once had. She gathered things, ash, cloth, bits of old chalk from behind the chapel. She wrote names on the trees, she whispered to the stone, and every night she sat in front of the altar and waited. The candle didn't burn for her, but the wind always rose. It carried stories, a vision seen in a dream. Clara walking through a field of blue ribbons hung like leaves. A child who claimed to hear a lullaby in the smoke. A woman who woke with a mark on her hand, the outline of a ribbon that vanished by dawn. And always the same sound, just before sleep. Clara, Clara, Clara. One night, lightning struck the old chapel roof. It didn't burn, but the bell fell. It landed on the steps, and inside it, unbroken, sat a single ribbon. No one had placed it there, but everyone saw it, and no one removed it. In time, the new priest left. He left without saying goodbye. The chapel was no longer his to keep, and the wind no longer listened to his prayers, because it had found its own language, its own memory, its own name. Children born in the years after carried that name, Clara. And every spring, on the night the snow turned back to rain, blue ribbons appeared in the fields, hung from trees, tied to fences, woven into braids. No one claimed to hang them, but no one dared take them down, because they all knew. Somewhere, out in the wind, she still walked, and she still remembered. Part 14. The memory that would not burn. Centuries later, the village is barely a village at all. The chapel is a ruin covered in ivy, stones sunken into the earth, roof collapsed, no bell, no altar, but the foundation remains. And the wind still moves through the trees like it remembers the shape of names. Tourists pass through now, historians, curious wanderers. They come to see the witch ruins. They take photos of the stone, speak in low voices. Some laugh nervously, as if they expect to feel something strange. Most don't, but a few do. They report the feeling of being watched. A whisper just outside their hearing. A ribbon fluttering when there's no wind. One child claimed she saw a candle burning under the rubble, but when her mother looked, there was nothing. One day, a woman arrives alone. She carries a journal. She walks slowly, stops often. She kneels in the tall grass where the chapel once stood, and she opens the book. Inside are names, dozens, written in ink, some in charcoal, some in faded pencil. Names passed down through whispers, half-remembered bedtime stories and dreams. At the end of the list, she writes one more, Clara, and beneath it, Ellie. She places a blue ribbon at the base of the stone. She lights a candle and she waits. The flame flickers. Once, then steadies. The wind rises, software, but sure. And she hears a voice, not aloud, not outside, but inside her chest. You remembered me. And so I returned, not as a ghost, not as fire, but as memory, living in voices that refused silence, carried by names that refused to vanish, held by hands that refused to stop writing. The candle does not go out, even when the woman leaves, even when the sky darkens, even when rain falls. It burns, because some flames are not meant to die, some stories are not meant to fade, and some memories, no matter how many times you try to bury them, will not burn. And in that place, where grief once ruled, where fire once silenced so many, a quiet peace takes root. Wildflowers bloom, children laugh. Blue ribbons flutter freely in the wind, and under the shade of an old ash tree, the names are still spoken. Not with sorrow, but with pride, with love, with a promise. You were never truly gone. You were waiting to be remembered. The end.